In a small town, there was a young woman who worked as a maid in one of the wealthiest households. She was a quiet person, known for her hard work and dedication, but she had a secret that very few people knew about. Beneath her simple uniform and her everyday duties, she dreamed of something much bigger. Every day, while she cleaned the grand rooms of the mansion, her heart would race with the thought of a stage, a microphone, and an audience. She longed to be a singer, to perform in front of crowds, to let her voice reach people and touch their hearts. But in the back of her mind, she also knew how unrealistic it seemed. The family she worked for lived in luxury, surrounded by wealth, and their lifestyle was as far from her own as one could imagine. The master of the house, a man who seemed to think he had all the answers, had made it clear to her once, in passing, that people like her didn't have the chance to chase dreams like that. He believed that the world was divided into two: those who had everything and could do anything, and those who worked for them, bound by their circumstances. He had a certain cynicism about life that made it hard to challenge him. His thoughts, though harsh, were rooted in his own worldview, a belief that some people were meant to serve and others were meant to shine. One afternoon, while she was cleaning the hallway, the man overheard her humming a melody as she dusted the old, expensive furniture. His voice echoed in the grand space as he chuckled lightly, the sound of his amusement ringing in her ears. "What's this? A maid with dreams of becoming a singer?" he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. He laughed at the idea, as if it were the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. "You can keep humming all you want, but don't fool yourself into thinking you'll ever stand on a stage. People like you don't get to do that." Her heart sank. She had never told him about her dream, never shared her secret desire to sing for a living. But in that moment, his words hit her like a punch. She felt small, invisible, and unworthy. The laughter in his voice made her doubt herself, and for a brief second, she wondered if he was right. Maybe someone like her could never escape the life she was living. But something inside her refused to give up. Something deep within told her not to let his words define her. The next few days, she spent in quiet reflection, going over his words in her head. The ridicule stung, but it also sparked something in her. She wasn't going to let someone else's limited view of her life determine her future. She may have been a maid in his house, but she was not bound by her job. She was determined to find a way to make her dream come true, no matter how impossible it seemed. At night, after finishing her work, she would sneak into a small corner of her room and practice singing. She didn't have a piano or a teacher, but she had a voice, and that was enough. Slowly, her singing improved. She started to find confidence in her voice, even though no one else knew what she was doing. But her dream wasn't something she could share with anyone, especially not him. It was her secret, her escape from the reality she lived in. Each note she sang brought her closer to something she couldn't yet see, but she felt it in her heart. The man's laughter may have hurt her, but it also ignited a fire inside her. She wasn't just a maid. She was a dreamer, and that was something no one could take away from her. Days passed, and life in the mansion continued as usual. The maid carried out her duties, cleaning, cooking, and looking after everything with the same attention to detail she always did. But now, her heart had something else driving it. Her dream of becoming a singer was no longer just a passing thought. It had become a fire inside her that wouldn't go out. Despite the employer's dismissive attitude, she found herself more determined than ever. Every time she cleaned a room or washed dishes, she imagined herself performing in front of a large crowd. The audience's applause echoed in her mind. She could see it clearly: the bright lights, the microphone in her hand, and the feeling of freedom as her voice soared through the air. But reality had its own way of testing her. She didn't have the money to pay for music lessons, and her days were already packed with the tasks that came with her job. Yet she refused to let these obstacles stop her. Instead, she searched for ways to make her dream a reality without anyone knowing. Every evening after she finished her work, when the house was quiet and the family was asleep, she would go to a small, hidden corner in her room. There, she sang to herself. At first, it was hard to hear her own voice over the noise of self-doubt. Her heart would race with nerves, thinking about how impossible it was for someone like her to make it. But every time she sang, her voice grew stronger. Slowly, she started taking small steps to improve. She found an old piano in the attic, and though she couldn't play, she would try to follow the simple melodies she remembered. It wasn't much, but it was enough to help her grow. She even started watching free videos online, learning about breathing techniques and ways to project her voice. There were moments when she wanted to give up. It seemed so unrealistic to think she could ever perform in front of people or be anything more than just a maid. But then she would remember the laughter, the way her employer had mocked her dreams. That memory kept her going, fueled her desire to prove that dreams don't have to be limited by your circumstances. One evening, after a long day of work, she heard about a local singing competition being held in town. The prize was a chance to audition for a major music producer. For a moment, she thought it was out of her reach. But then something clicked. She knew she couldn't let this opportunity slip away. Even though she had no formal training, no connections, and no experience, she decided to go for it. It was a risk, but it was one she was willing to take. She spent the next few days preparing. She picked a song she loved, one that had always inspired her. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like the right choice. She practiced in secret, her nerves getting the better of her with each passing day, but she reminded herself that this was her chance. She had to try. She couldn't let fear hold her back any longer. When the day of the competition finally came, her heart was racing. She stood in front of the mirror, dressed in simple clothes, far from the glitz and glamour of professional performers. But she looked at herself, and for the first time, she saw someone more than just a maid. She saw someone who had fought against the odds, against the doubt, and who was now about to step into something she had only dreamed of. As she walked to the competition venue, her nerves started to fade, replaced by a feeling she couldn't quite explain. A mixture of excitement, fear, and hope. She was ready to prove that dreams didn't need to be bound by one's job or background. This was her moment, and she was going to make the most of it. The day of the competition arrived, and the maid felt a whirlwind of emotions inside her. As she walked to the venue, the nerves in her stomach twisted, but she couldn't let them stop her. She had come too far to back out now. The streets were filled with people heading toward the event, some in elegant dresses and suits, others with instruments in hand, ready to showcase their talent. But she didn't belong to that world. She had always felt out of place in the company of the rich and the famous. And now, as she looked at the other contestants, she felt like an outsider even more. She was dressed in simple clothes, and unlike the others, she didn't have any fancy accessories or a manager behind her. But something inside her kept pushing her forward. She had always believed that dreams weren't just for the privileged. They were for everyone, no matter where they came from. The long hours she had spent practicing in the quiet of her room, the moments when her heart was filled with doubt, all led to this point. It didn't matter how others might look at her. What mattered was that she was ready to give it her all. When it was her turn, she stepped onto the stage, her palms sweating and her heart beating wildly. The audience looked like a blur of faces in front of her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. It was time to sing. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she reminded herself that she had nothing to lose. For see, music began, and as she started singing, the world seemed to disappear. Her voice, though shaky at first, began to settle. The words flowed out of her as she sang from the depths of her soul. She wasn't just performing, she was telling her story. Every note, every word was a part of her journey, her struggle, her determination, and her hope. The audience, at first, distracted by the other performers, slowly began to pay attention to her. Their whispers grew quieter, and soon she had their full attention. The maid had never felt this alive. For the first time, she was not just a maid. She was an artist. Her dream was no longer a secret. It was her reality. As she sang, her confidence grew. She wasn't thinking about how she looked or how she might be judged. She just sang. And the more she sang, the more she felt the connection with the audience. Their eyes were fixed on her, their faces full of interest. This was her moment, and she was going to make it count. When the music stopped, she stood there, breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. For a second, the world seemed still. Then, the room erupted in applause. The sound was overwhelming, and for a moment, she couldn't believe it. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine, filled with admiration. The judges looked at each other, surprised by the raw emotion she had brought to the stage. She had done it. She had stood in front of an audience, vulnerable and uncertain, and delivered something real. As she left the stage, her mind was racing. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had stepped onto that stage as a simple maid, someone who had always been overlooked. And now, she was leaving as a performer who had captivated an entire room. The nerves that had once held her back now felt like distant memories. The journey wasn't over yet, but for the first time, she truly believed in herself. She had taken the first step toward her dream. And no matter what happened next, no one could take away the fact that she had stood up for herself, that she had taken a chance on her dream. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that could change her life forever. As the competition wrapped up, the maid found herself surrounded by people offering kind words and congratulations. She was still in a daze, her mind unable to fully grasp what had just happened. The applause echoed in her ears, and for the first time, she felt truly seen. People who had once ignored her or looked past her were now acknowledging her, and it felt like a dream. But she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. This wasn't about the attention. It was about proving to herself that she was more than the job she had been given, more than the walls of the mansion that had always defined her life. The judges called the contestants to the stage for their final announcements. The maid stood with her heart in her throat, not sure what to expect. She had no expectations, really. After all, she was just a maid. But even in this moment, as her heart raced, she knew one thing. She had given it her all. She had stepped out of the shadows and shown her true self. When they began announcing the winners, she could barely breathe. First, second, third place were called out, and she still hadn't heard her name. She wasn't disappointed. She hadn't come for the fame or the prizes. But then, a surprise announcement came. "There's one more special recognition today," the head judge said with a smile. "We would like to acknowledge a performance that truly stood out to us, a voice that captured our hearts and brought a real sense of raw emotion to the stage." Her heart skipped a beat. Was this a mistake? Was this really happening? And the winner of this special recognition is the maid who graced our stage with her incredible voice. For a second, everything around her seemed to blur. She could hear the applause growing louder, and then, suddenly, it hit her. She was the one they were talking about. She had done it. She had captured their attention, made them feel something real, something that couldn't be ignored. The world around her felt surreal as she made her way back onto the stage to accept her recognition. The judges smiled at her, clearly impressed with her performance. "You have something special," one of them said. "You may not have the experience. Others do, but your heart and your voice are undeniable." The maid felt a rush of pride she had never felt before. For so long, she had been the person behind the scenes, unnoticed, invisible. But today, she had stepped into the light. She was no longer just a maid. She was a performer with a gift, someone with the potential to achieve something great. As she walked off the stage, clutching the small trophy in her hand, she felt a wave of emotions flood over her. She had always been told that people like her couldn't dream big, that they should stay in their place. But today, she had shattered those beliefs. She had stood up for herself, fought through the doubt, and proven that anyone could chase their dreams, no matter their background. Later that evening, when she returned to the mansion, the atmosphere was much different. Her mind was racing with the events of the day. She felt a new sense of confidence in herself, and she couldn't wait to share the news with the people she cared about. But when she walked into the house, she was surprised to find the employer standing in the hallway, waiting for her. He looked at her, his usual arrogant expression replaced with something else, a mixture of curiosity and surprise. "So," he said, eyeing the trophy in her hand, "it seems you've had a successful day." Her heart raced again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the knowledge that she had done something she could be proud of. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "I guess I did." The employer's eyes narrowed as he studied her. He had never expected this. "Well," he said after a long pause, "I guess you proved me wrong." Those words were simple, but they carried a weight that she would never forget. For the first time, she felt the respect she had always been denied. He hadn't just acknowledged her success, he had acknowledged her worth. And in that moment, the maid realized something important. She hadn't done this for him or anyone else. She had done it for herself. Her dream wasn't about getting approval from others. It was about proving that she could do something incredible on her own. And now, with the recognition and the confidence she had gained, she knew this was only the beginning of her journey. The maid woke up the next morning feeling different, like the world had shifted in some subtle but important way. Her hands were still tired from the hours of work she had done, but there was a lightness in her heart. The recognition she had received the day before still felt surreal, but now it was sinking in. She had been given a chance, and she had taken it. Not only had she sung her heart out on that stage, but she had also made people believe in her, even if just for a moment. As she went about her usual duties, the house felt different. The rooms she cleaned no longer felt like prisons of servitude, but spaces she could navigate with a new sense of pride. She no longer saw herself just as someone meant to stay in the background, to do the work no one else wanted to do. The maid had always believed that her purpose was to serve, but now she understood that she was more than that. She had her own dreams, her own aspirations. She was a person in her own right, not just someone defined by the job she had. Despite the new confidence she carried within herself, she still knew that this wasn't the end. The recognition at the competition had given her the taste of what was possible, but it was just the beginning. She still had so much to learn and so much to do. The road ahead was long, but now it didn't seem impossible. She could hear the music in her head, even as she scrubbed floors or polished furniture. She could feel the rhythm in her bones, a reminder that she wasn't alone in her dreams. The song she had sung on stage, the one that had filled the room with emotion, was now part of her, as if it had woven itself into her very being. Over the next few weeks, the maid began to take more risks. She found a local singing teacher who was willing to give her lessons at a lower price. With every lesson, she felt herself improving, her voice growing stronger and more confident. She would practice every night after her duties were done, singing, until her voice grew hoarse, pushing herself harder each day. Slowly, she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this dream of hers wasn't as impossible as it had once seemed. One day, while she was singing in the garden during her break, the employer walked by. He had always been a figure in her life, who seemed untouchable, someone who ruled over the house with an air of superiority. He stopped when he heard her voice, the same voice that had captured the attention of the competition judges. She was startled to see him standing there, watching her. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I didn't realize you could sing like that," he said, his voice softer than usual. The maid felt a knot form in her stomach. She didn't know how to respond. She had never expected him to acknowledge her talent, let alone comment on it. But she stood tall and simply replied, "Yes, I can." For a brief moment, there was silence. Then he gave her a nod, almost as if he was seeing her for the first time. "You know, you could really make something of this," he said before walking away. Her heart raced at his words. The man who had once laughed at her dream, the one who had dismissed her with such certainty, was now offering her a sort of approval. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her realize how far she had come. She hadn't needed his approval to follow her dream, but hearing those words felt like the final piece falling into place. Over the next few months, she continued to train, working harder than ever. Her lessons were paying off, and her voice grew stronger. She began performing at small local events, each one adding to her confidence. The applause she received each time reminded her that she wasn't just a maid, and that she was worthy of being heard. She was becoming more and more certain that this was her path, the one she was meant to follow. The maid had started her journey as someone who was unsure, someone who had been pushed down by life's circumstances. But now, she was a performer. She had proven to herself that no matter where she came from or what her job was, her dreams were worth chasing. And the best part was, she wasn't done yet. She had only just begun to find her place in the world, and every day was another step forward. Months had passed since that life-changing competition, and the maid's world had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Her singing had become more than just a hidden dream. It was her passion, her escape, and her path to something greater. The stage she had once feared, the one that seemed so far out of reach, was now within her grasp. She no longer saw herself as just someone doing the work that others didn't want to do. She had discovered a side of herself that she had kept hidden for so long, and now that side was shining brighter than ever before. With each passing day, her confidence grew. She had come a long way from the quiet, unsure woman who had first dreamed of performing. She now stood in front of audiences, her voice strong and clear, her presence commanding. She had begun performing regularly at local events, and each time the applause grew louder, more genuine. There was something special in the way people looked at her, something that went beyond the appreciation of her talent. They saw her determination, her story, and they connected with her in a way that was more meaningful than any recognition she had ever received before. Despite her growing success, she kept working at the mansion, determined not to forget where she came from. The job was still her source of income, and she knew she couldn't leave it behind just yet. But the days of cleaning in silence, of doing her work without any hope of something greater, were over. She had found something that filled her with purpose, and she held on to that with both hands. One day, as she was finishing up her chores, the employer called her into the grand living room. He was sitting by the window, looking out at the garden, and when she entered, he looked at her with a thoughtful expression. It had been a while since he had spoken to her, and the maid couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. But when he spoke, his voice was softer, almost respectful. "You've been busy lately," he said, his gaze steady. "I've heard you sing at several events. I can see that you've come a long way." The maid was caught off guard. She had never expected the employer to acknowledge her success in such a direct way. She had spent so much time doubting herself, trying to prove her worth to people like him, that it was hard to believe she was hearing these words. "Yes," she said quietly, trying to hold back the emotion that welled up inside her. I've been working hard. It's what I've always wanted." He studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing as if he were considering something. Finally, he spoke again. "I never thought you'd make it this far. I thought it was just a dream that would fade away. But I was wrong." The maid's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected him to admit that, let alone say it so honestly. The employer, the man who had once mocked her dream, was now acknowledging her journey, and it felt like a small victory. "I don't know what comes next for you," he continued, "but I think you're on the right path. Keep going." Her breath caught in her throat. The words were simple, but they meant the world to her. She had spent so much time thinking that his opinion mattered, that she needed his approval to succeed. But now she realized that it was never about him. It had always been about her and her belief in herself. After that conversation, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that she had the potential to go even further, to make a name for herself, and to continue living the dream she had once been told was impossible. The employer's words, though unexpected, gave her a sense of closure she hadn't known she needed. It wasn't about him recognizing her anymore. It was about her recognizing herself. The maid no longer viewed her job as just a way to get by. It had become a stepping stone in her larger journey. She was no longer the person who quietly followed orders. She was someone with a voice that deserved to be heard. As she continued to work and perform, she felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. Her future was no longer a series of doubts and what-ifs. It was filled with possibility, and while she didn't know exactly where her journey would take her, she was no longer afraid. She had discovered something within herself that could never be taken away. Her ability to dream, to achieve, and to prove that anyone, no matter where they came from, could rise above their circumstances and make their dreams a reality. As the weeks went by, the maid's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The recognition she had earned from the competition was just the beginning, and now she was getting more opportunities than ever. Local events, community gatherings, and even private performances began to fill her schedule. Every time she stepped onto a stage, she felt a little more at home. The nerves were still there, of course, but they had become familiar, almost comforting. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of something new, something exciting, something that made her heart race with possibility. Her performances were becoming more polished, and her reputation was slowly growing. She had begun to gain the respect of the people around her, not just for her talent, but for her determination. She was no longer the quiet maid who kept to herself. She was the woman with a voice that could move people, a woman who had dared to chase a dream that most would have called impossible. The applause she received after each performance was no longer just for her singing. It was for her journey, her story, and the strength she had shown to get where she was. Despite all of this, she never lost sight of where she had come from. She still worked in the mansion, still took care of the tasks that had once felt like a burden. But now, the work didn't feel as heavy. It was a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had grown. Every task, every chore, was a small part of the life she was building for herself. The job was no longer something she did out of obligation. It was something that allowed her to pursue her dreams. It was a means to an end, a way to support herself while she chased the life she had always wanted. One afternoon, after a particularly busy day at a local concert, the maid received a phone call that would change everything. It was from a well-known music producer who had seen one of her performances. He told her that he was impressed by her talent and wanted to offer her a chance to record a demo for a major label. She couldn't believe it. The opportunity she had dreamed of was finally within her reach. She had always known that her singing could take her places, but to hear it from someone in the industry felt surreal. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly believe that this could be the moment that changed her life. She had worked so hard for this, put in so much effort, and overcome so many obstacles. She had never given up, no matter how impossible her dream had seemed. And now, she was on the verge of something big. As she prepared for the recording, she reflected on how far she had come. There was a time when she had been afraid to even speak of her dreams, let alone take the steps necessary to make them a reality. She had been laughed at, doubted, and told that she wasn't good enough. But now, here she was, preparing to take her first real step into the music industry. It felt like a victory, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been told they couldn't do something because of where they came from or who they were. The day of the recording was filled with excitement and nerves. The studio was everything she had imagined: bright lights, expensive equipment, and professionals who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. As she stepped into the sound booth and put on the headphones, her heart raced. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for her whole life. When the music started, she closed her eyes and let the sound guide her. She sang with everything she had, pouring all of her emotions into the song. It wasn't just about hitting the right notes. It was about telling her story, expressing everything she had been through and everything she still wanted to become. The producer watched from behind the glass, nodding as she sang. For the first time in her life, she felt completely in control of her destiny. When the recording session ended, the producer smiled and gave her a thumbs up. "You've got something special," he said. "I'll be in touch soon." As she left the studio, she couldn't stop smiling. The world that had once seemed so distant, so out of reach, was now right in front of her. She had done it. She had proven that with hard work, determination, and belief in herself, anything was possible. The maid who had once been laughed at was now on the verge of starting a career that could change her life forever. Looking back, she realized that the journey wasn't just about reaching the stage or getting recognition. It was about finding herself, believing in her own worth, and refusing to let anyone or anything hold her back. The journey had taught her that no dream was too big and no person was too small to achieve greatness, and this was only the beginning.